A witch was burned alive in the Scottish Highlands. They say she cursed the milk to curdle, that she twisted her daughter's limbs into something unholy, that she rode upon the devil's back by night. But the truth is colder than fire and quieter than screams. Her name was Janet Horne. She did not scream. She did not run. And when the flames reached her feet, they say she smiled. This is not a story about witches. It is a story about fear and about what a village will do when it needs someone to blame. It was late autumn in Dornoch, and the wind had turned strange, not loud or howling, just strange, like something breathing over your shoulder, and when you turned, it was only air. The trees by the blackened peat fields had stopped swaying. They simply stood, brittle and listening, and the smoke from cottage chimneys no longer rose. It coiled sideways, crawling close to the ground like something hunting for warmth. The village was small, too small for secrets and too cold for comfort, the sort of place where boots echoed on stone and silence was a sound everyone understood. No one laughed too loud. No one stayed out too late. And if a widow talked to herself by the river, the town turned its head and said nothing at all. Janet Horne lived at the edge of the silence. Her house was just beyond the footpath, where the gorse bushes turned wild and the stones no longer marked property lines. It was a crumbling thing with a sunken roof and crooked timbers, so old it seemed to lean toward the earth, like it was remembering something it could no longer say. She lived there with her daughter. No one remembered the girl's name. Some said Mary, others said Elspeth. The villagers had stopped asking long ago. The daughter was twisted, her hands curled unnaturally, like roots searching for soil. Her walk was lopsided and slow. She barely spoke, and when she did, her voice came out in short, breathy bursts, as though each word was something she had to fight to keep alive. Janet, on the other hand, spoke often. She talked to chickens, to puddles, to clouds, to bread loaves baking on the hearth. Not with madness exactly, but with that strange calmness some widows wear, as if time had folded wrong inside them and left them wandering through hours no one else could see. Some said she had once been beautiful, a flaxen-haired girl who danced on Midsummer's Eve and could count the stars without losing breath. Others said she had always been odd, untouched by sorrow, but also untouched by reason. Whatever she had been, Janet Horne was now the last person you'd look to for help, and the first you'd blame when the milk turned sour. It began with the cow. One of Mr. McKay's cows, his best one, was found lying in the pasture, legs stiff, mouth foaming, eyes wide open and too bright. The local men gathered around it, arms folded, teeth clenched, muttering about blight and poison and bad luck. But as the wind picked up and the sky turned the color of old bone, someone whispered a different word. Witchcraft. No one said her name. Not at first. But they didn't have to. By the next morning, the whispers had grown teeth. Children were pulled inside early. Bibles were left open on windowsills. And down by the stone path near the river, a woman with her sleeves rolled up muttered that she'd seen Janet's daughter walking backward at dusk, her eyes rolling like a goat's. Of course, no one had actually seen Janet perform any witchcraft. No black cats, no poppets, no midnight rituals. But in a village like Dornoch, proof was a luxury. Fear was cheaper and far more available. Janet noticed the shift in the wind before anyone else. She told her daughter not to go into town that week. She stirred the oatcakes longer, sat by the hearth with her back to the window, stared into the fire without blinking. When the chickens refused to lay, she whispered to them in a tongue she barely remembered, something her grandmother had spoken during storms. At night, she hummed lullabies that no one taught her, not for comfort, but for silence, as if the silence itself might spare her. The villagers, meanwhile, continued to collect evidence. Little things, fragile as frost, A patch of thistle near the well that hadn't grown back. A dog barking at nothing. A dream someone's uncle had, in which a woman with no face stood beside his bed, whispering in Latin. A baby born with a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. All of it added up, not logically, not legally, but emotionally, the way fear always does. And then, one evening, as the sun dragged low and red behind the hills, a knock came on Janet's door. Not a gentle knock, not even a loud one. It was a final knock, 3 times with the back of a calloused hand, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for permission. Janet answered it slowly. Her daughter sat by the fire silent. Outside stood 2 men from the church and 1 soldier. Not local, from Inverness maybe, or beyond. They did not ask if she was Janet. They simply told her to come. Her daughter too. They said the magistrate had questions. They said it would only take a moment. They said she had nothing to fear, if she was innocent. She did not scream when they took her. She simply blinked once and stepped into her shoes. No coat, no bag, just the wind in her hair and the weight of something inevitable. Her daughter followed behind, 1 step at a time, her gait crooked like a branch twisted too long in shadow. They walked in silence. No goodbyes, no neighbors watching, just the road curling inward like the throat of a snake. They brought her to the Kirk house. Not a court, not really, just a square white room with no windows and the smell of damp stone. A single candle burned low on a wooden table, not for light, just for symbolism. The magistrate wore a black coat. His voice had the rasp of someone who rarely needed to shout, because his presence did all the shouting for him. He asked Janet to sit. She didn't. He asked her name. She answered, Janet. He asked if she knew why she was here. She said nothing. Her daughter was kept in the corner, sitting on a wooden stool too tall for her twisted legs. She didn't fidget, just stared into the space where the wall met the floor, blinking slowly, as though trying to understand the pattern in the dust. The questions came like snow, quiet, accumulating, cold. Did you curse the Mackay cow? Do you speak to spirits? Has the devil ever come to you, in dream or in flesh? Have you healed the sick without herbs? Have you touched your daughter's hands, knowing they are not made by God? Janet did not answer, not because she refused, but because she couldn't. The words no longer lived in her throat the way they once did. It was as though the cold had settled in her spine and frozen her memories in place. Instead, she blinked. She tilted her head. She looked at the flame on the table, flickering, flickering. They took her silence as confirmation. One man, balding, red-cheeked, eyes too small for his face, stood up and read from a leather-bound book. A passage about Jezebel, about women who dance with serpents, about unnatural mothers and unrepentant whores. Janet smiled, only slightly, the way someone smiles when they remember something from long ago, and the memory stings just enough to feel warm. The magistrate took it as mockery. The trial lasted 3 days, not for justice, not even for procedure, but for performance. Each day, more villagers came to sit along the back walls, pretending not to stare. They brought stories, small ones, things they'd once seen or half remembered or heard from someone else's grandmother. Someone recalled seeing Janet's windows open during a thunderstorm. Another remembered how bread baked in her hearth never burned, even when left overnight. Someone else swore they saw a cat come out of her house with human eyes. None of it made sense, but all of it felt true. And when fear feels true, it becomes truth enough. Her daughter was questioned too. They asked her if her mother ever whispered things to her in the dark. She said nothing. They asked if she had ever flown, or seen strange lights, or been taught charms. She blinked slowly. When they pressed her harder, raised their voices, leaned in close, She made a sound, not a scream, not a word, just a hum, a quiet, off-key lullaby. It was the same melody Janet had sung by the fire, and when the villagers heard it, they gasped, not because it was evil, but because it was familiar, and sometimes familiarity is more frightening than the unknown. By the fourth day, the decision was made. There was no sentence read aloud, no gavel, no ink on paper, just the subtle shifting of shoulders, the nodding of a man in a black coat, the look exchanged between fear and power. She was to be burned, for the safety of the village, for the cleansing of the land, for the soul of the child. The night before the burning, Janet was kept in a stone cell below the church. No straw, no fire, just a blanket the color of moss in a wooden bowl of water she did not touch. No one came to see her, no priest, no family, only the wind. It came in through a crack in the wall, bringing with it the scent of peat smoke and snow. It whispered through the gaps in the stone like a forgotten voice, and Janet listened for hours, not speaking, not crying, just listening. And at some point, near midnight, she spoke to it, not in English, not in Gaelic, but in something older. She spoke softly, slowly, as though she wasn't casting a spell, but remembering one, not to save herself, but to say goodbye. In the village above, the men were building the stake. They worked quietly, without ceremony. The wood was damp, hard to split. The rope was rough. The wind made their eyes water, but they did not stop, because they believed they were doing something righteous, something holy. They told themselves she was not a woman anymore, that she had traded her soul for darkness, that her silence was arrogance, not confusion, that the way she looked at them, half-tilted, unreadable, meant guilt, because it had to, because otherwise they were just burning a woman. Janet did not sleep that night, nor did she pace. She sat upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and her eyes stayed open, unblinking, as though waiting for someone who had promised to come, but never would. Her daughter, kept in a separate room, cried only once, and even then, only for a moment. Then the humming began again. Dornoch awoke to mist, not the usual kind, soft and rising like breath from the earth, but a heavier fog, one that swallowed roofs and blurred faces. The sort of fog that feels like forgetting, the sort that makes you question if what you're about to do already happened, or if it should have happened at all. They came for Janet before the sun was fully up, not with fanfare, not with drums, just footsteps, slow and deliberate, a small procession of men with downturned eyes and mouths that had forgotten how to speak. One carried a torch, another held rope, a third dragged her daughter behind him, though gently, as if afraid she might vanish like smoke. Janet stepped into the road barefoot. Her feet were pale and thin, veined like frost. She did not ask where they were going. She already knew. The stake stood at the edge of the village, not in the center, no one wanted that, but near enough for all to see, for all to watch from behind curtains or under hoods or from the shadows of eaves. The wood piled high had been soaked overnight in oil drawn from whale fat and tallow. It would burn hot and fast. That was the mercy, they said. That was their kindness. She was tied gently. There was no struggle, no curses hurled, no thrashing limbs, only the wind brushing her hair back from her face, as though trying to see her more clearly. Her daughter was made to watch, not as punishment, not even as proof, but because someone believed it was necessary. A man held her still, but she did not fight him. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes glassy and distant, as though she was watching a story she'd already seen and couldn't change. The magistrate said nothing. There was no sermon, no prayer, just a nod. And then the torch touched the edge of the wood. The fire caught slowly, a crackle, a sigh. Then a hiss like a breath being taken in, too deep, too sharp. Janet did not cry out. She tilted her head back, eyes open, not pleading, just watching. The flames licked at the hem of her dress first, then climbed, crawled, searched for skin. And when they found it, they did not roar. They whispered. The fire, it seemed, did not want spectacle. It wanted silence. No one spoke. Not the villagers, not the priest, not the wind. Only the daughter, standing barefoot now in the fog, began to hum that same off-key lullaby, software endless, as though she were singing her mother into sleep. They said Janet smiled, not with joy, not with defiance, but with recognition, as if for the first time in years, something finally made sense. As if the fire was not a punishment, but a release, not a death, but a memory coming home. When it was over, there was no ash, only the stake, blackened and bent, still warm. The fog remained, curling around it like a mourning shroud. The daughter was led away, but not imprisoned. No sentence was passed, no future was given. She simply walked, crooked and slow, out of the village, her feet whispering on stone, the tunes still in her throat. Some say she wandered into the hills. Others say she followed the fog until it swallowed her whole. No one ever saw her again. Years passed. Dornoch grew quieter. The fog returned less often. The field where the stake had stood turned to moss and soft grass. Children played there, not knowing the ground still remembered, not knowing that beneath it, something still waited to be spoken. And Janet, she became a story, a caution, a whisper in the church rafters when storms hit, a name carved shallow into the record books, but never erased, because even if you forget the fire, you never forget the silence it leaves behind. And so, if ever you walk through the village of Dornoch, and the fog creeps low across your ankles, and the wind turns colder than it should, stop, listen, and hum a tune only the forgotten remember.